This is our homily for Sunday, October 20th, the 29th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Once Muhammad Ali, who referred to himself as the greatest, was flying across country. And as the plane was getting ready to take off, the stewardess asked him to fasten his seatbelt. He replied arrogantly, "Superman doesn't need a seatbelt." The stewardess replied, "Superman also doesn't need an airplane to fly. Now fasten your seatbelt, mister." We laugh at Muhammad Ali's exaggerated sense of self-importance. Last week in the Gospel, Jesus took on our human tendency to become wrapped up in our possessions. This week, he takes on another of our human foibles, the desire for glory and power, to be the center of attention, like Muhammad in the joke. Jesus had just made his third prediction of his suffering and death. The first time Peter said that it was impossible and earned a "get behind me, Satan." The second time, the disciples were arguing over who was the greatest, and Jesus sat a child in their midst as an example. In our gospel today, John and James have the chutzpah to ask for the highest seats of honor, and the other disciples become angry with them. Jesus must have been divine to have such patience with these guys. And so Jesus clearly states how a person of the gospel must regard leadership. Whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant. Then he makes it even stronger. Whoever wishes to be first among you will be the slave of all. Look at those two words. Servant, diakonos. That meant a table server to Jesus's audience, one of the lowest ranking positions in their society. Slave. Many of the conquered people, including Jews, were slaves to the Romans. It was humiliating. James and John were going the way of their culture. Jesus would be a king who would make Israel number one. Jesus is giving a new culture, a gospel culture, a culture of service. Perhaps knowing that this human tendency to lord it over is so strong that even the church would fall into it over and over, all of the synoptic evangelists present this incident. Pope Francis's papacy is a clear teaching of today's gospel. He says we need to be a humble, servant church at the service of the poor, and especially the leaders, the clerics. Francis has emphasized that clerics must, quote, smell like the sheep. There is no room for clericalism in the sense of looking for power and prestige if we really follow Jesus. Wanting always to be first and have more is a temptation for all of us. Reflect on how aggressive driving has become. It becomes rarer and rarer that someone will let you in, and even more rare that someone will wave thanks if you let them in. Or the people who could only think of themselves and their freedom rather than the health and welfare of others as we move through the pandemic. Do these examples reflect something larger that's happened in our culture? Rugged American individualism cannot replace the gospel call to serve others. So the reflection I invite us to this week: how important is it for me to be first and have my way? Am I really a slave or a servant to others, especially those in need, as the gospel calls me to be? How can I improve? I end with a story that I know I used before, but it's a good one. During the American Revolution, a man in civilian clothes rode past a group of soldiers who were busy pulling out a horse carriage stuck in deep mud. Their officer was shouting instructions to them while making no attempt to help. The stranger who witnessed the scene asked the officer why he wasn't helping. With great dignity, the officer replied, "Sir, I am a corporal." The stranger got off his horse and proceeded to help the exhausted soldiers himself. When the job was completed, he turned to the corporal and said, "Corporal, next time you have a job like this and you don't have enough men to do it, inform your commander-in-chief, and I will come and help you again." Too late, the corporal recognized Commander-in-Chief George Washington. Perhaps Washington was a good general and president because he had the attitude of Christ, the attitude of being a servant. May God help us get down off our horses to be a servant to others. God bless.